Welcome to Paranormal Palace
I'll be
Radio,
right back.
where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me tonight is going to be Scott Roberts. Some people call him Scotty Roberts. At any rate, we was going to also try to have Micah Hanks here. However, it just turns out that Micah's show and mine air at exactly the same time. So Micah said he would try to pop in for a brief instant if he could. So there's no guarantees on that one, but if he does, hey, we're going to be very happy. But tonight's topic, we're going to be talking about the Paradigm Symposium, which is coming up October 18th to the 21st in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Now, if you'll scroll down below the call-in number to the pictures of Micah Hanks and Scotty Roberts in the show description down there, right below the show description, there's a big poster up there saying Paradigm Symposium. If you'll just click anywhere on that there banner or that poster, it'll take you to the website and tell you how to get the tickets, how much the tickets are. It has a list of all the people who's going to be in the event that's going to be speaking, like Eric Van Daniken. And, well, rather than go to the whole list right here and now and then covering it again in a minute, as soon as Scotty gets back on the line, we'll go down this here with you in just a few minutes. If y'all hold the line just one moment, I got a caller coming in already. Pardon me, folks. You're on the air.
Oh, this is Scotty. Sorry about that, Royce.
Oh, do I still have you on hold on the other line?
You know what? I got a new phone here, and I messed up something, and I disconnected you.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, well, we're back then.
All right.
I was just introducing us to everybody, or introducing you, and I was explaining to them that Micah Hanks' show just happens to be on the same night or same time as mine, and that he's going to try to pop in briefly, but we don't know for sure he's going to be able to make it. And
Fantastic.
I was telling them about the upcoming Paradigm Symposium, October 18th to the 21st in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I was going to wait until we had you on here to talk about the guests and what they're going to be speaking about and, you know, things of that nature. And before we get started, I'd like to remind everybody, if you want to call in and ask questions, the number is 832-632-7904. And if I don't answer right away, I'm probably usually waiting for a break in the conversation. If it gets picked up by voicemail, just go ahead and call right back. Also, if you want to learn more about the symposium, you can click on that big poster banner underneath the description, like I said, or click on the link, www.paradigmsymposium.com. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about Scott Roberts, he's the owner and publisher-editor at Intrepid Magazine at www.intrepidmag.com. And if you want to learn more about Micah Hanks, the one that we're not sure is going to be able to join us or not, that's http://www.gradientreport.com. And I have his banner linked on the Radio Friends page over there if y'all like to pay him a visit. He's a fantastic host and a fantastic author, and I'm quite sure Scott and him's going to have a really great conference going on up there in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So, Scott, how are you doing tonight?
Royce, I am doing great. I'm sorry I kind of made you jump the gun there by my lack of knowledge of the technology of my new phone. So.
Yeah, I know. I tell you what, cell phones are especially bad when you get a new one, about not being sure exactly how to operate them the first few times.
Yes. So, anyways, I am here, and did you ask me a question there? Did I get lost in my rabbit trail about technology?
No, I hadn't asked one yet, but I was going to get around to that one here. Now, what all are you going to be doing at this here symposium? Is this going to be mostly just speakers having their own hour or their own time slot, or are there going to be any other events beside that, or like some symposiums have contests, for example?
Yeah, now we are still building some little things that we might be doing in and out, but basically we've got 18 different speakers that are going to be speaking through the course of the weekend, and at the same time we've got a few extras. We've got from Ancient Aliens, we have Giorgio Tsoukalos, Phil Coppins, and Bill Burns, and I think Eric Von Daniken may join them, are going to be giving an Ancient Aliens presentation, a special presentation on Friday evening. We also, on Saturday night, we have a semi-formal banquet. I would say semi-formal. It's just, you don't have to come in a tux or anything. But during this, we're going to have a dinner theater-style panel discussion with all the different speakers. And Ian Punnett, who did the weekend Coast to Coast, as well as he's got a morning talk show up here on one of the big Clear Channel stations up here that he's done for over a dozen years, I believe. So he will be there, and he's going to moderate that panel. And we've got a couple of little extras that we're throwing in there, but mostly this is going to be the ability to come and hear some of these iconic people speaking in this field. And we've got, you can go to the website and see everybody at ParadigmSymposium.com, or just click on the banner over at Royce's homepage. And they're all going to be presenting their different angles on this ancient alien field as it ties into ancient archaeology, ancient anthropology, cosmology, and there's a couple of different guests too that are speaking on topics that are a little bit broader than that, but they all tie into this ancient revisioning our place in the universe type of thinking, and which is the overall theme of the event. So we wanted to create an event where you could just come and hear these people. You'll get chances to meet them at, of course, the very typical for events like this, the meets and greets, the dinners. There's going to be autograph sessions. And we have a very special, we've got 3 tiers of tickets. And one of the highest tiers of tickets has available to it a cocktail party that you can join in and get on a rather, and I put this in quotations, one-on-one. It's closed down to about 75 guests only, and that is to go into a cocktail party and meet face-to-face with these people and brush shoulders with them, talk to them personally while having a Guinness or a cocktail or a soda pop. Uh-huh. So those are the events so far that we have staged. There's going to be a few things, extras, after hours, bands, a comedian, some things like that. But for the most part, this is just going to be lecture session after lecture session, broken up by a few autograph sessions, a few breaks in there, meals, of course, and things like that.
Sounds fascinating, especially since a few of these people I've actually interviewed before. Now, George Murray I've never had the pleasure of interviewing, but I've seen him on TV before on certain shows about ancient aliens, so I know just from watching that he's got an interest in the topic himself. I have interviewed Giorgio, and I just heard you pronounce his last name Tsoukalos. I always pronounced it Tsoukalos. Have I been getting it wrong?
It's that T and S together thing, like what's the Chinese beer? Tao? So it's got that sound to it. The TS is Tsoukalos.
Ah, so Tsoukalos.
And as he likes, he's Giorgio A. Tsoukalos. So.
Okay. Now, also, I've had Philip Coppins on more than one occasion, and, well, we all know that that's a favorite topic of his. Bill Burns, I know he's been into UFOs for many years. This is the first I've heard of him being into ancient aliens, but I'm quite sure that he's probably studied the whole wide gambit, hasn't he?
He has. As a matter of fact, an interesting thing about Bill Burns, I got to know him a few years ago when I was the editor-in-chief over at TAPS Paramag. And I interviewed him. That's how I first met him. And then I did a couple of radio things with him with a certain network I was with. And Bill is very broad-based. We all know him from the show UFO Hunters. And now he's also one of the contributor talking heads to Ancient Aliens on History Channel's H2 network. But Bill is also, many people don't know this about him. He is an attorney. He has his doctorate, I believe it's in Shakespearean studies, And not just the literature studies, but the architecture of Shakespearean Tudor England was one of his specialties. And so the man who I got on his show once, we were talking about my book, and he and I got off for quite a while talking about Shakespearean and Tudor England items. And so he's a very interesting man. And he's got, God, I believe about 30 books out there. But he's also been into CSI types of investigation work. And he writes about, I think he's got some books out about some of the mass murderers and psychological analyzing of them and things like that. So Bill Burns is very broad-based. Very
multi-talented, yes. Very intelligent.
And he also owns UFO Magazine.
Yes, he does for a fact. And he's had that magazine for many years, and it's very popular and it's very informative. He's got a good reach on it going for him, too. About George Noory, is he going to be there in person, or are y'all going to have him via Skype?
George Noory will be here in person, giving his presentation and signing books. And so it'll be fun to have him live and in person. As a matter of fact, he used to, our event is here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and he used to be, I believe it was the station manager. I don't want to misquote that. I believe he was the station manager or some kind of programming director for KSTP up here in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area 20 years ago. And so for him, this is a bit of a homecoming. And he and Ian Punnett, of course, who did the Weekend Coast to Coast, are very good friends. So they're going to be doing a little bit of hanging out together, and maybe even Ian might do a little something with George. I'm not sure. But George is going to have a very solid presentation with a wide-open question and answer time.
I seem to remember, I think it was last year or the year before, George Noory had a TV show of his own that he talked about different subjects of the paranormal. Do you know if he still has that or not?
He does not. I believe that was fairly short-lived. It was kind of one of those series that, if I remember correctly, they were trying to get up and running, see what kind of response they had to it, seeing how the show got put together. It was more in development, and it was a test run, and I don't think it went beyond that.
I see.
If I remember right, it was kind of like if you remember the old In Search Of, it had that kind of feel to it.
Okay. Kind of like Mysterious Universe.
Yes.
Okay. Also, I see Marie D. Jones and Larry Flaxman up there, and they're always a couple of favorites. And you were talking about Broad Spectrum. These two, and even Nick Redfern I see on here also. These three are probably some of the broadest spectrum authors you're going to find out there, don't you think?
They are. Marie D. Jones, a very dear friend of mine. She has, I want to say 8 or 9 books out through New Page Books. She is, one of her books was a best-selling book, and I think that was Destiny versus Choice. She and Larry just came out with a joint book again on, this book is from the future. Right.
I've got
it's all
it,
about
and
time.
I'm reading it.
All about time and time travel and all of that fun stuff.
I can't wait to finish the book. My problem is right now I'm about 10 to 11 books behind reading up for the show, and I got to get to it as I can.
You should see my office. I'm about 30 books deep into books sent to me for the magazine, for our podcast. We do a little podcast for Intrepid Mag. It's not an official radio show, but Micah and I do that together. And we have all kinds of books and all kinds of interviews we're trying to get lined up. But having time to read right now has been the bane to my existence. I'm in the middle of finishing, not even the middle, I'm near the end of finishing my second book for New Page Books as a follow-up to the Nephilim book. And that's due to New Page in about 2 weeks. And then I will feel a much lighter load on my shoulders after that. Plus, putting together this symposium and publishing the magazine, I've got about all I can handle at the moment. So,
I know exactly where that's
things
coming from.
Stack up on me.
Oh, yeah, they sure do. But, hey, they're fantastic reading. And Nick, he's got a new book out as well. I want to say, and I don't have the book in front of me, it's in my headboard where I'm reading it at night, Pyramids and the Pentagon. The Pyramids and the Pentagon. And it's all about
a lot of these, many of them are biblical topics, like Noah and the Ark. Now, we've all heard the story over the last 30, 40 years how explorers have found what they thought was Noah's Ark in the icy crevasses of Mount Ararat. And there were one of them was an astronaut who is now, I think, no longer alive, if I'm not mistaken. One of the former Apollo astronauts wrote a book, Noah's Ark, I Touched It. So Nick has dug into a lot of this, but how there was great governmental interest in this, and how there are things that have been covered up about it, and that's what's interesting about Nick. Nick can expose more conspiracies than you can even imagine exist, and this book deals with a lot of those things, and he names names, and he has documentation. Some of it is hearsay, but he has a book out there, this Pentagon and the pyramids in the Pentagon, where it's talking about all the conspiracy theories around some of these very popular pop cultural interest type of topics.
Yeah, one thing I really admire about Nick, because I've read several of his books, is he separates which part is his view, which part is hearsay, which part is actual fact, so that it makes it easier for the reader to get an idea of what's exactly what. It takes out a lot of the guesswork, in other words.
And Nick is this man, a wealth of knowledge. You could sit down I have heard it said that publishers will approach him and say, "Hey, we'd like you to do a book on this," and he'll right away launch right into the topic and say, "Sure, I can write about that." And so Nick is very prolific with the books he puts out, and his sources and his own personal source of knowledge is unfathomable. And he's got quite a number of books out. I think just in the last 2 years he's written books like Final Events, which talks about the Collins elite, which is part of the Pentagon, which is an actual, for about the last 55 years to 60 years, has been an agency within the walls of the Pentagon that is there for exploring the UFO phenomenon and aliens. And so he talks about the Collins elite in that book. He just came out with, about a year ago, The Real Men in Black.
Yes, he did.
He also came out with, not long ago, 6 months ago, Keep Out. Government conspiracies.
And that's the conspiracies?
Yeah. And now he's got pyramids and Pentagons in the Pentagon, and now he's got something new coming out, and I don't remember what it is. So Nick is one of those guys who can just pump the information out.
You sure can. Now, I also seen you're going to have Laird Scranton up there, and I show him his picture beside Marie D. Jones and Larry Flaxman's.
Yes, Laird Scranton is somebody that I met through getting to know Walter Crittenden. And if you know Walter Crittenden, I did try to get him for this symposium, and he just couldn't do it this year. But Walter Crittenden has the Binary Research Institute, and one of his big thrusts is trying to get peer review within the scientific community about the binary star system that he has proven that we exist in. That there's a binary star system. Our solar system rotates around. They rotate around each other every 26,000 years or something like that. Now, while he's been working on that, he has his big CPAC convention out in Sedona every year. And Laird Scranton is closely affiliated with him and has gone to his seminars and talks. And Laird talks about ancient cosmology. He wrote a couple of big books on the Dogon in West Africa. And so he just came out with a new book in the last 6 months called The Velikovsky Heresies. And that book is all about the scientist whose name shall not be named within the scientific community, because he was a contemporary of Einstein and Oppenheimer, but he put forward the theories about Venus having traversed through our solar system and bouncing off of planets or our moon or something to get into its current orbit, not all that long ago on the grand scheme of the calendar of the cosmos. And but Velikovsky, because of his theories, was absolutely shunned within the scientific community until his personal friend, Albert Einstein, found that Velikovsky's theories were very tangible and very real and very accurate. And even Einstein, just a few days before he died, he was writing a paper to validate some of Velikovsky's findings. He was writing to support him. And he died, of course, just a few days later, so he never got to really publish that or come out with that. But now, the interesting thing is they're finding a lot of Velikovsky's heretical scientific theories are proving to be true. And this is what Laird Scranton just wrote about. And I believe he might be talking about that at our conference.
Now, that sounds interesting. In fact, I've got a brochure from his publisher about his book, and I'm planning on getting him on my show about that, but I haven't done it yet because I'm booked into October now, and I'm trying not to get too far ahead.
We just had him in Intrepid magazine. He wrote an article for us on the Velikovsky heresies 2 issues ago, 3 months ago, something like that. So you can find that back issue at intrepidmag.com.
Now, I'm looking at a name here that's not familiar to me. Is John Ward is an archaeologist.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little something about him?
Sure. Dr. John Ward. He is a British man from Herefordshire, England, and he moved about 10 years ago to Luxor, Egypt, and he is an archaeologist, anthropologist in Luxor, which he lives in this little town. The ancient name of the town is Menedat Habu. And this is the town where he can walk in a morning's walk over to the big Ramesseum, the big funerary mausoleum of Ramesses II of Egypt. And that's one of those very famous old ruins, with the big flat front with the trapezoidal shaped front and the rows of lions and all the pillars and things. And so this is in that town, and that was actually built on the site of a very old Menedat Habu, which had the old temple to the Ogdode there, which is, they say this is the spot that was the creation mound, according to the Egyptian religions. And the Ogdode came down in 4 couples and settled on the creation mound and all of that. And that happened on that site, according to Egypt. Now, that's right where he lives. So right from the mountain range, he's shown me pictures. He shows me on his video chats when we're on Skype. He says, "You see the mountains right there?" Which is, looks like it's about 2 miles away. Over that ridge, he says, is Valley of the Kings. So they live right on the Nile, right on the other side of the Valley of the Kings. And he's been doing a lot of exploration into the Western Desert, and he is finding some sites out there, days' journey into the Western Desert, that have never before been archaeologically cataloged. And so he shows me pictures, and I say, "What is that, John?" And he says, "Can't tell you." And so he says, "But I want you to see this picture." And they're finding grottos that date back 2,000 years, 3,000 years, some of them. He's finding sites that are amazingly similar to other sites you would see around the world. So John is coming to the symposium to speak on something very different, though. He is going into ancient Egyptian symbology and how it links to Herefordshire in England, and along the way, the Cathars and the Knights Templar.
I was about to say.
So that is going to be a very interesting presentation.
I would agree. I've read something online a few years ago about Hertford, or however you pronounce that town, and its connection to the Knight Templar.
Yes, and that's where he's from, so he has a very close connection to it. Now, his associate, Dr. Maria Nilsson, she is working on some peer review papers of some of the things that they've discovered. And while she can come along with him to this event, she's going to accompany him, she cannot speak, because this sort of event and the topics we're covering here are the things that get you frowned upon within the halls of academia. And so she can't say a word publicly at this event, because it might taint her peer review. And I fully understand that, and I get that. But that is one of the things when I was talking to Phil Coppins a few months ago. We were talking about there are different sites around the world that he said would be like the it's referred to in quotes as the Chinese Roswell in China. There are things that if they could get in with actual funded archaeological digs and academia, they could uncover a whole lot and answer a lot of questions. But those types of organizations, that type of field of study, they don't want to have anything to do with this stuff, because to them, it's all fringe stuff. It's all something that would, according to John, it would just taint their ability to get peer review, their ability to be able, like Velikovsky, which Laird Scranton wrote about. He came up with such wild theories that were outside the realm of current day science of his time that he was shunned within that community and never taken seriously again. And it hurt his career, if you will, during that time. And that's what happens out there in these fields, is that you've got something there to look at and there to research and there to dig up, but you hit a brick wall when it comes to anybody who perhaps has the ability to latch into these bigger organizations that have the funding to do anything with it, because it would cost them their peer review. So even John at times, he says, I ask him about the ancient alien connections to things. And he kind of laughs. He says, I really can't talk about that too much. He says, officially, I have to say this. He says, but in all reality, he says, I experienced the paranormal here in Egypt. I experienced these things. And he says, but those are things I cannot include in my work. So it's very interesting. Now, he and I, by the way, are planning on writing a book together. When I finish this book for New Page Books, that I'm currently on now, I plan in November to go to Egypt and spend some time there with John and Maria. And we are looking into Moses, the character of Moses, and who were the pharaohs around him. I write about this to great extent within my own book. I have a theory about this.
You think Moses and Akhenaten might have been the same?
No, I think Akhenaten was far too late in history for Moses. I go in my own book, The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, and I want to establish Moses as the author of the book of Genesis, which is tradition, Hebrew tradition, Jewish tradition, Christian tradition, but I don't think just because it is all of those things that it should be poo-pooed, that it should be accepted. There's something to tradition. And Moses, he's mentioned, of course, in biblical scripture. I've run across people who say, well, there's your first big problem. You accept the Bible as having anything accurate in it at all. And I say, wait a minute. Ancient books of faith always included their history, their agriculture, their trade. They never separated the two. That was back when you look at these old books of faith, they may have their items of faith and religion, but they're inextricably linked to their histories. And if you don't agree with their religion and their spirituality, it doesn't make their history necessarily wrong. And something I looked at and wrote about greatly in my book in establishing Moses was, I'm going to rabbit trail on you here a little bit, Royce, is that there is a rock-solid date in the Old Testament. It's in the book of 1 Kings, and it's the date when Solomon dedicated the temple in Jerusalem, the first temple ever built in Jerusalem. In archaeological terms, it's referred to as Temple 1 in Jerusalem. They dispute whether Solomon even existed, but they do not dispute Temple 1. And Temple 1 was built right around 966 BC, and the only dispute you have between rabbinic, Christian, or even secular scholars is the date of about 3 to 4 years in either direction. Some say, no, it was built in 968. No, it was built in 960. You get that kind of dispute, but everybody knows it was right on the median date is 966 BC. And there's a verse in 1 Kings in the Old Testament that says, and on the day that Solomon dedicated the temple in Jerusalem, it was the 480th year of the coming out of Egypt under Moses in the Exodus. And if you do your math, you end up with a date, 480 from 966, roughly 1446 BC as the date of the Exodus. Now, this is, if you can trust that date in the Bible. And that's why it's so important that it's a rock-solid date of the dating of Temple 1. So if Moses actually exists, the stories are true and the Exodus really happened, and that date and the number of years they give is accurate in 1 Kings, You end up with 1446. Moses, as the Bible story says, was 80 years old. Get the picture of Charlton Heston out of your head, or the cartoon, The Prince of Egypt. According to the biblical version, Moses was 80 years old when the Exodus took place. That would have had him born right around 1526 BC. And all you have to do is start looking at the pharaohs who were on the throne. Remember, it says Moses grew up the first 40 years of his life as a prince of Egypt and in the household of Pharaoh. And anybody who spends 40 years growing up somewhere. When I was 40, I was pretty ingrained in being an American. This is where I grew up. Doesn't matter what my roots are. I'm Scottish and Welsh in my heritage, but I'm American. Same thing with Moses. They say he was a Hebrew, born of Hebrew slaves, but he grew up in the palace of Pharaoh for 40 years. And there's so many writings about him in the Jewish Mishnah and the Mikvah and all their traditional writings about how he was a great general under the Pharaoh and all these different deeds he did along the way that first 40 years. He would have grown up in 18th dynasty Egypt, and the pharaohs around him were Tutmosis the First, Tutmosis the Second, Tutmosis the Third. And he would have been born during the reign of Tutmosis the First in 1526, and Tutmosis the First had one daughter. And if you read the biblical account, it says Moses was placed in a basket by his mother. She sent him down the Nile. His older sister followed along to make sure he was safe and make sure he got into the tide pools of the palace where Pharaoh's daughter found him. But then it says Pharaoh's daughter sent him back to his mother until she was old enough to claim him. Now, in 1526, Pharaoh Tutmosis I had one daughter. Her name was Hatshepsut. And Hatshepsut was about 7 to 10 years old in 1526. She didn't become a woman until she was 13 to 14 years old by their traditions. And so she sent him back to his mother. She claimed him back when he was about 4 or 5 years old. And Hatshepsut was an amazing woman in 18th dynasty Egypt. She was married to her half-brother, Tutmosis II, who was weakly and died very young, but he left a son from a harem wife, whom he named Tutmosis III, who was the rightful heir to the throne. Well, he was too young to take the throne when Tutmosis II died, so Hatshepsut becomes co-regent with him, and she actually takes over the pharaohship of Egypt. She wears the men's clothing, the king's garments, the little fake beard that they wear, and she took over as pharaoh. And she was an amazing ruler of Egypt. Now, she had beneath her a man who tutored her daughter, Neferuri, and his name was Senamut. I believe Senamut and Moses to be the very same person. He was a few years younger than she was. She bestowed on him 20 royal titles, including royal architect, vizier, all these kinds of things. And finally, she bestowed on him a title of great significance. His title was Mother's Brother. She elevated him to Mother's Brother. And when you break that down, she was establishing that she was his mother, but she was elevating him to the position of brother, as brother with the gods. When the pharaohs became pharaohs, they became brothers of the gods. And so she elevated him to that status. There was some speculation, there may have even been a love affair there. Well, the interesting thing about Senamut is about the date that Moses would have turned 40, Senamut disappears off the scene. He's got a royal tomb. There's nobody in it, never been used. Everything said about Senamut stops. It comes to an abrupt halt. Well, what happens in the biblical account of Moses? He and his entourage, it says, are out, and they see the Hebrews being beaten by a taskmaster, and he murders the taskmaster. Well, this gets found out, and he flees. Well, and then that's when he goes to Midian and stays there for 40 years until the whole burning bush scene, and he comes back to Egypt at age 80. And remember, he says something there. He says, when God is speaking to him through the burning bush, he says, I can't go back to Egypt. The Pharaoh and all those with him are seeking my life. And God said, all the people who sought your life are dead. The first big question was, if Moses is a member of the royal household, why in the world would the Pharaoh care if he killed somebody who was one step above a slave, a taskmaster? It's because of this. Tutmosis III who was the rightful heir to the throne, and his mother, stepmother, took over the pharaohship over him, raising her own adopted son, Moses, Senemut, to become the next pharaoh. In his place, she's grooming him, raises him to the level of mother's brother. Well, when Moses kills this Egyptian taskmaster, and it's found out, what does Tutmosis III do? He's got political opportunity to off his rival. And Moses flees. And I think there was probably more that went on than what you see in the biblical account. So many other things in Egyptian history around that time. So the interesting thing about studying Moses, when you take him out of the box, you get out of the box of thinking Christian, Jew, all of this stuff, you get out of that box and look at it as a historical story, you've got a very different picture of who this man was. And this is the kind of stuff, this is where I started this rabbit trail, Dr. John Ward and I are going to talk about. He disagrees with me on some things. I disagree with him on some things. And we're going to look into writing a book that we've tentatively in our heads entitled The Grimoire of Moses. And it's going to be digging very deep into Egyptian mysticism and history and symbology and how Moses would have experienced all these in the couple of different versions of his reign, his upbringing that we're going to look into. And by the way, it's very interesting. In my book, I entitled a chapter about digging into Moses to establish base facts. It's like establishing a baseline for what I'm writing about. I entitled the chapter, Moses, the Pharaoh God of Israel. And that's exactly what he established himself to be. Make no doubt about it. This guy who was trained to be a Pharaoh became a Pharaoh of Israel, and he established himself as such. This is where he had all the ability to be a great lawgiver, the ability to rule a kingdom because of his training. And there's something very interesting that Moses writes about. It says, when they were wandering in the wilderness after the Exodus, it says, and remember, Moses wrote this about himself. It says, and Moses pitched his tent outside the camp, and God would descend on his tent in the form of a cloud every day. And there Moses would talk to God face to face as a man talks to his friend. But then 9 verses later in the same chapter, Moses writes, and no man can see God's face and live. Now, did he just contradict himself? You better believe he did. What was he doing there? He was establishing that if you're a man and see God's face, you'll perish, but I can talk to God face to face. What was he establishing? I am more than a man. I am like a brother God, like the pharaohs were. This is what he said about establishing in all his writing. And so it's very interesting when you start digging in it. But that's what, getting all the way back to the main point, Dr. John Ward, this is the stuff he and I talk about, and he's bringing some amazing stuff to the table.
Sounds like you both are. Now, also, I see you're going to have David Weatherly, and he's the author of The Black-Eyed Children, and I've had a little talk with him about his book, and this is a topic that, at least to my knowledge, very few have covered, but yet it's a very fascinating subject.
It's one of those topics that I knew very little about until I read his book, and I've talked to David about this. This is creepy stuff. The whole thing about the black-eyed children, I'll let David talk about that with your audience sometime. I'm not even going to get into it because I couldn't do it justice, but it's interesting how he ties into almost what I would call these ultra-terrestrials that we are starting to see. If you recall, in the last few decades, ufology and the paranormal were like two different things that didn't want to have anything to do with each other. Now, they're blending again at the edges. They're finding out, wait a minute, all of this stuff blends together. And when I mention ultra-terrestrials, you've got your extraterrestrials, you've got your intraterrestrials, you've got your interdimensional terrestrials, if you will. You've got these ultra-terrestrials, which represent beings that transcend all of this, or a part of all of this, and it starts merging together. I think this is what David has hit on in his book, these kids, and he talks about theories about what he thinks they are, what he thinks they aren't, and so on. And he'll be here talking about the black-eyed children.
And I also see you're going to have MUFON's John Venture there.
Yes.
Is that Ventra or Venture?
Ventry.
Ventry, okay. Now, I don't know much about him, but maybe you could fill us in a little bit.
Sure. John Ventry is the regional director, I think, or the state director in Pennsylvania for MUFON. But he's a little more than that. It's one of those, if I'm not part of that politic at all, but something about that with John either having been or still being considered to be the next national director or international. I don't know what it is. I don't want to misquote that and get him in trouble. He didn't tell me any of this. I've seen this from other sources. So John is somebody very important in MUFON. John's also had a television show. Cannot remember the title of it. I think this something about UFOs over us or UFOs in our skies or something. And it was like a reality type of show where he would go visit people who have had these ufological experiences and seen things, and he would basically catalog their information. And they would go and they would, with other members of MUFON, and go and try to establish fact from fiction in a lot of these. So John is somebody who, for many years, he's got a big conference of his own. It's either the weekend before ours or the weekend after. I think it's the weekend before ours. You can check his site. He's doing a MUFON conference in Pennsylvania. So John is going to come and speak about this whole thing. And, you know, when I started to say he's going to speak about UFOs and stuff, it's interesting. This is why we named our symposium Paradigm Symposium. Micah and I were talking about it, and I said, have you watched how the paradigm has shifted between what used to be ufology and what is now ancient alien type of theory? Now, Eric von Daniken was a pioneer in ancient astronaut theory 45 years ago. This is nothing new, but it seems nowadays, like I said, things are starting to merge at the edges more and more and more. You have got ufology and ancient alienism, if you will, ancient archaeology, cosmology, anthropology, all starting to merge again, and it's like a new paradigm in all of this. It's no longer, I saw a light hovering over my house or my car, and I lost 9 minutes of time or something, and it's merged into something more than that. It's more theory behind it, more theory about where we came from and where we're going and so on.
Okay.
That's what the paradigm is all about.
And then you also got Dan Madsen. He's a publisher.
Yes. Dan Madsen is going to seem to some people at first brush like the odd man out. Why is Dan here? Dan has been a friend of mine for almost 30 years. And Dan is somebody I invited to come and speak because of what he has done with his career. And he says, I don't know, Scotty, how do you think I would fit into this? And I said, well, Dan, you're a good speaker. I said, number two, the things you have done. He is a guy that took what we all had, everybody from Eric von Daniken to Phil Coppens, Giorgio Tsoukalos, Bill Burns, George Norrie, any of these people that I've talked about. We all had as kids that curiosity that drove us into thinking more about this. Dan, while he is just as deep a thinker as any of us on this stuff, he took it in a different direction for his career. I first met Dan in the early 1980s, where he was the publisher of a little mimeographed, stapled newsletter that he'd mail out called the Star Trek Official Fan Club Magazine. And like I say, it was very cheaply put together, Xeroxes, stapled together and mailed out to his fan base. Well, he was the first guy in the early 80s to get a licensure from Paramount to do a full-fledged Star Trek magazine, and he started publishing the big, slick, glossy, full-color Star Trek Communicator magazine for many years, and I think it's still going today. He also, from there, launched off into doing the Star Wars magazines. He got a licensure from Star Wars to do the Star Wars magazines and the Lucasfilms magazines, which included Indiana Jones magazines. Then he also got, I think one of his last big contracts before he sold off his company was he got all the Lord of the Rings magazines. And he did all of those. And so he had this huge empire within this fantasy science fiction realm, but it all started because he has the same curiosities and the same questions we have. And I said, Dan, I would love you to come and talk to everybody and tell them what you did with your particular angle or facet on these things that we all believe. And he says, man, I'd love to. So Dan is coming to talk to us about his career.
Wow, that sounds exciting. Now, I see you're also going to have Anthony F. Sanchez, the author of UFO Highway, and he just recently had a symposium himself, or a conference, I'm sorry.
Yes.
So
I spoke at, both Micah Hanks and David Weatherly spoke at Anthony's, it was the Sacramento UFO Paranormal Summit. It was 2 weekends ago. And he wrote the book UFO Highway, where he's dug in very deeply into a lot of the DNA questions, origins, how they link to mankind and ancient alien findings. And he's linked to this stuff all together. He also has talked extensively over the last few years about the Archuleta Plateau and the Dulce issue of the hidden bases and things on the Archuleta Plateau in New Mexico. And, of course, again, all the names and the facts. And Anthony F. Sanchez is like he lives an episode of the X-Files. He's like that mythology that runs beneath. Anthony actually dropped out of doing all of this about 2 years ago. And when I first contacted him, I ran across some of his writings on the Internet. And I thought, I want this guy to write for my magazine. This was early last year. And I tried to get a hold of him, tried. Every time I tried a link, it said Anthony is no longer in the field and he's closed down his websites. Somewhere along the way, I came across his email, and I sent him an email. I said, look, I would really like to get some of your information. And he said, as fate would have it, he says, I'm finding I'm being pushed back into this by more and more information. And he says, absolutely. He says, I'm going to be up and running again here with my book and all of this stuff. And so he started writing for me, and we became good friends. And he had me out at his symposium to speak, and I had asked him to come to Paradigm and speak on these issues.
And you got another favorite of mine coming up, too, Paul Von Ward.
Yeah.
And he deals a whole lot with the ancient astronaut theory from a scientific as well as a spiritualist angle.
Yes. He was a minister at one point in his life, much like me. I was in ministry very early on in my career. And Paul Von Ward wrote the book, We Have Never Been Alone. And he is coming to speak on that topic. Now, Paul Von Ward, of almost everybody I have at the symposium, we have a great personal repartee with each other, but I know so little about him other than that. And so he's going to come, but he's going to talk about his book and all of those theories he's come up with. And I think they're very solid theories. Things I've done, and when I say, I was in ministry, you and I have talked before, so you know some of this about me. I was in Bible college, I was in seminary, I went into ministry in the early 80s, and I was in ministry for a while, and I had these questions, and it kind of drove me, in a sense, I pushed myself out of the church. And I didn't throw out the baby with the bathwater, but I had big questions. And this is what I deal with in my book, The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim. My follow-up, which I said a couple of times now, is due in 2 weeks. It's going to be out in February of 2013, if not a little sooner. It is called The Secret History of the Reptilians. And it is subtitled The Pervasive Presence of the Serpent Throughout Human History, Religion, and Alien Mythos. And so that book is what I'm finishing up now. And I address these in the book on the Nephilim. I've gone heavy into my biblical studies and historical studies and anthropological studies and found how these things are all starting to link together. And even in this book, and I'll give you a little hint here with this book, in talking about the reptilians, I go from talking about they're presented in ancient times to the presence of them in all these major religions, and then how it's morphed into even some political movements nowadays that talk about the reptilian races that are behind even the Illuminati as we know it. And so that's what Paul Von Ward does. He's in the same boat. He's talking about the spiritual aspect of all of these things.
Okay. Now, there's the last two speakers that I listed. I've got you to go through each and every one of them so far. The last two left are you and Micah Hanks, and I think many people out there, pardon the cough, by the way, they already know that Micah Hanks is the host of Gradian Report, And he's also the author of Molecule, Magic, and Mysticism, and I might have that in the wrong order.
Magic, Mysticism, and the Molecule.
Okay.
Is his book that he wrote. Now, you may or may not know this, he also has a new book coming out with New Page Books, my publisher, and Eric Von Daniken's publisher, and Phil Coppin's publisher. And his book is called The UFO Singularity. And he has already finished that, and that's already been submitted to the publisher, and that's going to be coming out, I believe, by the end of the year.
Yeah, anybody that's, any authors that goes through New Page Books, they end up going through Warwick, and Warwick comes to me when it comes time to put them on the air, so I get the notice on it.
Yes. You'll see that one coming up pretty soon if you haven't already.
Not yet, I haven't, but I haven't seen your new one you were just mentioning a second ago yet, but I'm pretty sure that Warwick's going to have some new stuff coming out in the very near future.
They'll be promoting it. They'll be doing the PR. You can find the Secret History of the Reptilians and the UFO Singularity on New Page Books' site. It's already up there in their catalog. You can even find them on Amazon right now, but they are not out again for several months, either of them. But they can be pre-purchased at Amazon.com, and I think Barnes & Noble and some of the big sites already.
Oh, wow. I never knew that it hit Amazon so soon, before it actually hit all the other
I found it on Amazon myself, and I was surprised because somebody actually came to me and said, hey, your book is available, but I can't buy it, other than a pre-order. I said, that's because it's not out yet. And then I was surprised, and I went and checked, and sure enough, they've got that listed on Amazon already.
Okay, well, that's very cool. Now, what's you and Micah going to be talking about?
I am going to be talking about the topics of my book, the Nephilim, as it goes into the history of the reptilians and those races. So I'm going to be talking about that, history, religion, anthropology, and how it links into all the ancient alien issues. And Micah Hanks is going to be talking, I believe he's going to talk about the UFO singularity. So he's going to talk about and I don't even understand everything about his book. He is such an over-the-top intellectual. As a matter of fact, for fun, I refer to, at Intrepid Magazine, my friend Micah Hanks, he refers to me as captain, and I call him my science advisor. So that is what he is. He is the scientist to my theologian. And so UFO singularity has all these things that start to wrap in together, and he can talk about this more to you, how they all wrap in together to this singularity that's coming about, whether it be something we produce ourselves or something that is actual. And that's what he's talking about with all this phenomena. It's a very different take on the UFO phenomenon.
Sounds good. Now, also, I was going to ask you, because we got like 7 minutes remaining, is there anything that I didn't think to cover or that you wanted to tell everybody about?
I think you've about covered it, and you've let me kind of spill at the mouth, which it's easy for me to do. You can put a nickel in me and I'll talk for 4 hours. So I think we've kind of covered it. All I would say to any of your listeners is that, we've fallen under some criticism already, mild criticism, well, you guys are just doing this symposium for money. And I said, you're damn right we are. I said, we can't do it for free. Same thing with our books. Any book you read that you like, a publisher has a different intent, usually, than the author. An author wishes he could write that book and publish it, and he'd stand on the street corner and give them out. I wrote this. I want you to read it. It's great. It's got some great stuff in it. A publisher will say, that's great, but your book has to sell in order to perpetuate itself, and if you ever want to write for us again, your book has to be saleable. And that's why they go through the process. They go through in choosing the people that they hire as authors. And the same thing for our symposium. This is something where there is what I call the more esoteric side versus the more practical financial side. The esoteric side we all know about. I want to say to everybody, if you are interested in these things that we're talking about, this is going to be the symposium or the event of a lifetime. The people that are gathered together to talk about this stuff are icons in this field. And just sitting beneath them for an hour and a half to 2 hours at a shot and soaking this all up for 3.5 to 4 days is going to be an amazing experience. You're never going to see this same symposium like this again. So we're trying to disseminate information and not just do the pie in the sky. I feel this and I think that we're trying to, all of this stuff is being presented as we've studied this, we've researched this. This is stuff many of you know some things about even, and we're trying to give you more information, more and more and more, grow your knowledge on this topic, because it's a huge topic. The other side of that is, of course, we have to charge to do it. Otherwise, we couldn't do it. It's expensive to get all these people together. It's expensive to pay for all their airfare. It's expensive to rent a hotel. I have signed away my life just on my hotel contract, which I will be liable. If anything bad happens at this event, I'm liable for about $50,000 personally. So this gives you an idea. An event like this costs about $100,000 to put on, very conservatively figuring. And so what we are doing, do we want to make money at this event? Absolutely yes. We would like to make enough to pay our bills and make enough to perhaps perpetuate the Paradigm Symposium. So we could do another one next year, maybe a couple of other smaller ones along the way. Maybe do some little bits and pieces of publishing for some of our writers in our magazine who can't seem to get into the big publishers. Things like that. It's going to benefit Intrepid magazine greatly. We're trying to expand Intrepid into other areas and make this a magazine that's not just a magazine, but there's something more to it that you can get. There's more information in this technological age. So we are, on one hand, we are presenting information and good information. On the other hand, we've got to charge to do it. So it costs a little bit to come to this. So all that to say, if you are interested in these things, go look at our website. We've got 3 package prices in there, or 3 priced packages at different levels that you can come in. One, the initial level is just you get to come to all the lectures and the Ancient Alien presentation on Friday night. The second level is you get to add in the banquet plus that panel discussion, which will be done in dinner theater style. The third level is you get all of that, plus you get this cocktail party, which is, it's rather limited for the cocktail party. But, so go check it out, and there's still 4 months away until this event. So there's time, we tried to build in the time, we started advertising this thing about 4 months ago, to build in the time to say, if you want to come to this, take a look and plan ahead. And it's going to be the weekend of October 18th through the 21st, third weekend in October in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the Hilton Doubletree. And that, lest people think, one of the misnomers about Minnesota is that we are always in Arctic frozen tundra up here. Not so. I'm standing out in my garage and patio doing this interview, just dripping sweat because it's been about 95 degrees and very high dew points. The humidity it's damn near subtropical here in the summer. And so the transitional seasons are very nice. The third weekend in October, we call it our prime fall color season. And that weekend, that week is generally, the second to the third week are generally where you see all the oranges and the yellows and the reds on the trees. And it's very, very temperate up here during that time of the year. So flying into Minneapolis, don't worry about snowstorms the third weekend of October. So it's going to be a gorgeous event, a gorgeous time of the year. It's going to be an amazing group of people being here, and I'm looking forward to just sitting in it myself.
And that's going to be at the Doubletree Hotel, wasn't it?
Yes, it's the Hilton Doubletree Park Place. It's all on our website. It's about 20 minutes from the airport by the freeway, but it's about 3 miles outside the downtown Minneapolis area to the western suburbs. We call the Lake District starts out there. So it's a very nice hotel, a lot of accommodation. If you plan on coming, I would plan on getting in there and getting your rooms reserved too, because while we may have 700 tickets available for this event, they do not have housing for 700 people. Now, there are hotels all around the area right there within a diameter of a quarter mile, there are, I think, 3 or 4 other hotels. But if you want a room at the event, I would go book your room now. Even if you don't get your tickets yet, I'd go get your room booked. And there's information on the website to show you how to do that. They're giving us a special rate on rooms as well.
Okay. Well, with that, I show that it's now 9 o'clock. Scott, it's been fantastic as always, and I'm going to be in touch with you further down the road, especially when I see over at Warwick your latest book is ready to come out, and we'll try to get you back to talk about it.
I would love to. Royce, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming, and it's been a great evening. You have a good one, and enjoy
it. And
if
Micah makes it to your show tonight, say hey for me.
Well, I'm going off the air after this one, but that's okay.
All right.
I'll have them back in
the
future.
Royce.
Thanks
for having me, buddy. All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, everybody, I want to thank everyone for coming out and seeing the show and having a good time, I would suppose, but we're going to call this in here a wrap. Everybody enjoy your 4th of July weekend, and I just called him back by mistake. I was trying to hang up the phone with him. Anyway, if y'all going to be drinking out there, try to make sure you get you a designated driver so that don't have any accidents out there over the holidays, and we'll look forward to seeing you this coming Saturday. Y'all have a good one.